Hello, welcome to TransByDef. My name is Morgan Fay, and this week's topic is realistic goals of living a transgender life. So that's a very open-ended question, and it first brings up the consideration, well, what if you're not going to transition? What can you expect then? And unfortunately, I don't have a very good outlook on that. I did it for decades, and that entire time was pretty much a long stage of chronic depression. I was functional, but most of the times I didn't want to be. You never get to know yourself. The word dysphoria is a perfect word for it. It's just nothing is right. Nothing is in the right context. So I think most of us will all come to the conclusion at some point in our lives where transitioning is something we have to do. And hopefully that becomes an option for you at that time. If not, then unfortunately you see the very high suicide rates amongst trans people. And I think that's what happens when that dysphoria gets too great and transitioning doesn't seem to be an appropriate option. But it is. And I think you can't have much goals other than to survive through it if you're not going to transition. It's going to be a struggle for as long as you try it, and it's going to be tiring. That's the best way to describe it. It's just a very tiring, very draining experience, and it's constant. It never lets up. So one point or another, I hope people who are transgender do decide to transition to find themselves within that gender spectrum, because only when that happens is someone going to be able to be a whole person, and is that person ever going to come out? It's very surprising to me that when I first started transition, I thought I had a clear picture of who I was going to be, of what kind of person I would develop into, and that I was pretty far off the mark. My personality has kind of surprised me in a lot of ways. So I didn't really know myself, even though I knew something was wrong and I had that sense of myself on the tip of my tongue, so to speak. I never got a chance to really develop. It was a personality which was put into a coma before puberty, and it never had a chance to grow and experience and to live. And I think transitioning is necessary in order to live. You can scrape by, you can get by, but it's no life. So when you do decide to transition, what are realistic goals? Well, first thing, have no goals. There is no realistic goals. Everyone is going to transition differently, and the more you place goals upon yourself, the more you have expectations, the more likely you're going to trade in one kind of dysphoria for another. So you can expect that there's going to be changes. What those changes are is going to be different for each person. But the biggest changes are going to be when you start HRT, because whether you have significant physical changes or not, the majority of the changes happen up here. Just because you have a female brain before transition doesn't mean you have all the pieces. Under a different hormone regimen, being flooded with testosterone, there are pieces that you have that don't fit, and there are pieces that you need that are missing. And you really need that HRT in order to finally become a whole person. I know there's a lot of people out there who think that HRT isn't necessary, that you can transition socially without it. But in my opinion, I disagree. I think you'll always be lacking something until you actually get on HRT and fix that inconsistency within your own mind, within your own chemical makeup. So once you do begin HRT, the changes are going to be fairly significant, and they're going to be mostly mental. There's going to be a difference in the way that you feel. You're going to have ups and downs rather than just a constant state of down. And then there's going to be differences in the way you think. I hate to say it, but I'm definitely not as good of a driver as I used to be. But there's a lot of other benefits that have come along with it. Um, and there's also going to be changes in your libido and your sexuality. And for me, that was a big difference because that male sexuality, which was foreign, which was like an alien entity for me, always brought me a source of discomfort. Um, it's interesting that it's not going to be that your sexuality is going to lessen, it's just going to change. And you kind of most likely have a feeling for what your sexuality is underneath, how your libido works, how you're attracted to people. But that male sexuality kind of strangles it out. And once that testosterone goes, that new sexuality really comes to the forefront. And you have to be expecting the possibility of a change in your orientation. And if you're not cool with that, then that's something you're going to need to get right with ahead of time, because it can happen. It happened for me. It's usually not going to be, across the board spectrum change, but for me, my sexuality definitely broadened. So mentally, there's going to be a lot of changes. But what's going to occur there is that you're going to be able to integrate your mind with who you are supposed to be. You're going to get rid of those foreign pieces that try to make themselves fit within the way you feel, and you're going to be able to finally develop your personality and who you truly are. And that in itself is the greatest experience, the greatest benefit of HRT. Any kind of physical changes are just icing on the cake, so to speak. There's definitely going to be some, but what you're going to see is going to be different for every person. And if you go in with the mindset that it's going to work magic, it's going to be magic pills, you might be disappointed. And that disappointment can make transitioning something that isn't going to be that dysphoria relieving event that it should be. And you might think, like I did, that the physical changes are going to be minor and you're never going to transition well, and you might be pleasantly surprised. So you have to just kind of see what it does and expect that the majority of the changes are going to occur mentally. And those mental changes is the key, is the most important aspect to transitioning. So outside of the mental changes, what can you expect? Well, there's definitely going to be some changes physically. Now, how much those changes occur? Well, it varies. Like I said, you can usually expect to see some changes in your skin texture, the fat deposits. Usually you have some fat redistribution. You're not going to see any kind of change in facial hair. If you're lucky, you might see a change in body hair, at least how quickly it grows. I had a lot of changes, and some of those changes were ones that weren't really typical to happen. I mean, I went from being 5'11" to 5'9", so I dropped 2 inches in height, and that's not something that typically happens. So what you expect and what is going to occur is usually going to be very different. So you just kind of keep an open mind about it. Now, as far as trying to live stealth, well, in my view, stealth was not so much an option for living. In the past, it was an option for survival. Nowadays, between the way information is so interconnected and the fact that we are more visible as a group, and that, it seems like every week, there's a new place in this country that's offering us protections, it's not the same requirement in order to live a safe life as it once was. Now, by no means are we a fully protected group, and of course, violence unfortunately occurs to us at a much higher rate than anyone else. But it is getting better, and so the necessity for going deep stealth isn't the same necessity that it once was. Now, depending on how well changes occur, we all live stealth to one degree or another, and again, it's a safety issue. You don't want to go out and simply announce that you're trans because you don't know who might take offense and react hostily towards that. So we all live stealth to kind of the degree that we can, but amongst my friends, amongst the people who know me, I don't try to hide it. I don't try to pretend that I'm not trans. I've said it before. I'm proud to be trans. I'm proud of, making this change of what I've gone through and where I'm going to. So you have to take ownership of who you are, and adding that degree of confidence, adding that confidence to your presentation goes a long way in how people are going to treat you. Recently, my wife, she showed me this article that she read where the person inside, their premise was basically that trans people focus way too much on worrying about passing. Idealistically, I completely agree. Passing should not be something that's necessary. In the perfect world, your appearance won't matter. But that's not the world we live in. So the better you pass, whether it's through physical changes, through HRT, learning to adopt mannerisms, learning to adopt the body language, dressing appropriately. I see so many, unfortunately, I see so many trans women that, they go to a very provocative dress style, and that's a problem because we, as a group, are already kind of misconstrued as being sexually motivated rather than motivated by our identities, and that kind of feeds into that, and it lessens our status. It kind of dehumanizes us. So the way you present yourself goes as far as much as how much kind of changes you're going to experience through HRT or through any kind of surgeries that you're going to do. So you can expect that as much effort you put into it, there's going to be payback for it. There's going to be a payout. There's going to be effects that you're going to be able to change and the way that people are going to treat you. Now, the better you pass, the easier it is that you're going to be able to get through life because you'll have more ups than downs. Unfortunately, a bad experience socially can definitely put a damper to your day and possibly week or longer. So the passing, unfortunately, at this moment is something that's important, but whether or not HRD is the magic pill for you, there's a lot of other things you can do to help present. And presentation is unfortunately still a very important matter because it is going to be what's going to keep you safe. Besides that, it's also what's going to kind of expose you to a new social realm that you haven't experienced before. It's interesting that you can actually see by the way people interact with you how well you pass, but also by the people who already know you, how well their mental perception of you is changing. A good example is the nod. As guys pass the street, they do that nod, which is, saying, I'm not a threat, but don't mess with me at the same time. It's a dominance issue. And as you start to transition, as your friends and your coworkers begin to change their mental perception of you, they'll stop doing that nod. So it's a giveaway to see how people perceive you, and it's pretty interesting to see how it slowly changes over time. And while that changes, you're still going to start getting more warm smiles from women, and it's, for example, when I first started transition, I purchased women's clothing at the same place I worked, and there were actually complaints made by a few associates that I was doing that. And of course, there's nothing that, nothing came about that. It's a ridiculous complaint. But those same people who made complaints are now within my social circles. We have, the kind of conversations you expect to have with women. So the perception changes over time, and that has a lot to do with presentation. Whether or not that presentation is aided by HRT, it's still something that you can do. So how big of an effect you get from hormone therapy does not rule out whether or not you're going to pass, because passing is not about looking flawlessly like a female. Passing is about being perceived as one. And you can make that perception change regardless of your appearance by the way you present, the way you talk, the way you hold yourself, the way you interact. And focus on those smaller social circles. And as your appearance begins to become more feminine, you can start expanding your social circles. So I think that's about it for realistic goals. And to recap, don't have goals. Have hopes. You want to see changes, and they're going to happen. What you're going to get is different for everyone else. So it's take it as an adventure. It's opening up a Cracker Jacks box. You never know what you're going to get inside. So you've got to live it, and you've got to appreciate what comes, and you've got to work at it, because if you don't work at it, you're just going to trade one dysphoria for another. So I am Morgan Fay, and I will see you next week here on TransByDef.